What's up, hockey fans? Welcome to the Wraparound, brought to you by the Hockey News and presented by Sticks.com. I'm your host, Emma Lingan. I am joined today by Michael Augello and Kelsey Surmacz of the Hockey News. And we are here, yes, still in the dog days of August, talking to you about the latest and greatest from around the hockey world. And yes, believe it or not, we do still have things to talk about. Before we do, though, do want to remind you all that we are brought to you by our friends at Sticks.com. Why break the bank on sticks when you can get pro level composite sticks without the pro price tag at Sticks.com? That's STIX.com. Head over now and gear up without the markup. All right. So, as I mentioned, it is August. There is not a lot of active hockey to be talking about here, if any at all, I don't think. But we are doing a lot of forward looking, a lot of forward thinking about next season and the season to come. And, this is something that comes up every year as we enter a new season. There's always certain players, but for this I want to focus more on coaches and general managers that have the most to prove, or at least in the minds of their fan bases and the media have the most to prove. So I want to start with coaches, whether it's maybe a new coach starting in a new position with a new team, or someone who's been there for a while and maybe their job is on the line. Mike, I'll start with you. In your mind, who do you think behind the bench has the most to prove this season in the NHL?
Well, I split it up each conference, so I'll give you one on each. In the East, even though he's one of the more successful coaches in the NHL, he has not been able to get the Carolina Hurricanes past the conference final, and that's Rod Brind'Amour. His reputation is great. He's a great coach, but it's sort of like the Marty Schottenheimer of the NHL, somebody who could get a team just so far and no further. So, they have some talent. I have had issues with the way the team has been constructed, but Brind'Amour, I think, needs to get them over the line. In the West, they went a different direction. It's a new hire, Glenn Gulutzan in Dallas. That's another team that is extremely talented and can't get past the Edmonton Oilers, or just can't get to the Stanley Cup final. And I think they eventually will, but they got rid of Peter DeBoer and now bring in Gulutzan. So I think they're hoping for a little more success there with him at the helm.
Those are some good picks, I think. Kelsey, what do you think?
Yeah, I also had Brind'Amour for pretty much the same exact reasons. But somebody I'm keeping an eye on is Mike Sullivan this season. Obviously, just hired by the Rangers, 3 consecutive non-playoff seasons with the Penguins just before that. And I think, in a sense, there's a lot for Sullivan to prove both to the Rangers and to the NHL and himself. I mean, he's one of the winningest coaches in the past 25 years in the NHL. But I mean, there were a lot of questions before he left Pittsburgh about whether his system is still viable, whether he was kind of past his shelf life in Pittsburgh or there was just something amiss there. I am curious to see how he meshes with this Rangers roster and see if he can get them back in the playoffs this season, because this is a Rangers team that doesn't want to tank. They don't want to bottom out. They want to maximize, what they have with their veterans and what they can get out of those guys. So I'm curious to see what Sullivan does over in New York, just to kind of put a stamp on it and prove that he's still one of the elite coaches in the NHL.
Yeah, I think coaching the Rangers, playing for the Rangers, not for the faint of heart, just being in that market in any capacity. So definitely agree with that one there. I'm going to also just toss in here, as Mike would say, quoting the Music Man, right here in River City, right here in Nashville, Andrew Brunette, definitely on the hot seat. I think maybe a little more so in the minds of the fans than in reality. I think that Barry Trotz is still going to give him some wiggle room as much as he can to develop as a young up and coming coach in this league. But I do think that Nashville's got to get off to a good start this year in order for him to keep his job. Right or wrong, good or bad, that's just kind of the reality of it after the abysmal, disappointing season that Nashville had last year. All right, so let's go to the GM side of things. Mike, who do you think of the GMs in the league have the most to prove this upcoming season?
two for the price of one here at the Wraparound. In the East, I will say Chris Drury of the New York Rangers for the reasons that Kelsey mentioned regarding the Rangers and their switch over. I mean, he has gutted a team that went to the Eastern Conference Final two seasons ago. A lot of trades and a lot of moves that were questionable. And unfortunately, it doesn't seem that he's under any kind of heat to lose his job because James Dolan just gave him an extension. In the West, Kelly McCrimmon of the Vegas Golden Knights. If you look at their situation, Aiden Hill failed in the playoffs. Alex Pietrangelo is probably out for the rest of his career. And what did he do? He went out and spent $12 million on Mitch Marner. If that doesn't work, the owner might have a little bit of a problem with that.
Yeah, a little bit. Kelsey, what you got for GMs? What do you think?
Yeah, Drury was also my pick for the East. Another guy I'm keeping an eye on is Kevyn Adams. I think, Kevyn Adams has proven in one way or another something the last couple years, but I think Buffalo obviously needs a definitive direction. I think at this point, the fans just deserve something more than what the product has been the past couple years. And I think, well, not the past couple years, the past however many years. So I think we're at a point now where Kevyn Adams really needs to hunker down and either do or don't here, and kind of really commit to one direction or the other. The other one you already mentioned for me is Barry Trotz. There have been a few hit and misses. We saw the offseason Nashville had last season, and a lot of people didn't expect this team to bottom out last year. And here we are. They were one of the worst teams in the league last year. So I think there's a lot on Trotz's plate this offseason. Again, it's kind of unclear which direction Nashville's taking definitively this season. So we'll see if he can get more out of these guys that he signed to the roster last season to really make a push competitively. So I'm keeping an eye on Trotz and on Adams.
Yeah, both good ones. I think Kevyn Adams in particular is one that every year it feels like we're having the same conversation that, oh, this is a make or break deadline or a make or break off season. And somehow he still keeps hanging on to a job. So I'm sure Mike could give us a whole podcast worth of thoughts on that one. But for the sake of time, we will move on to another topic for this one. I'm curious, something that I've thought a lot about is, every year with every team, we see these young fringe NHL players who, maybe have been sort of those like quad A guys in baseball terms who never fully, cement themselves as full-time NHL players based on the rosters that they've played on in the past, but maybe could graduate to being full-time NHLers with the right fit in the right organization. And we see these cases every year in the NHL. So Mike, I'm curious if anyone comes to mind for you, maybe like a fringe player who maybe kind of got buried with whatever organization he was on, now with a new organization or with a new opportunity, now having more of a chance to graduate into being a full-time NHL player this season.
In the East, I don't know if I would say fringe, but he has not been given a ton of opportunity in terms of minutes, and that's Nick Robertson in Toronto, the guy who scored 14 goals, 15 goals the last 2 years, playing under 12 minutes a night. And, he signed to a 1-year contract, and maybe the fact that Mitch Marner is there, he gets an opportunity to play higher in the lineup. That all depends on what Craig Berube wants to do. In the West, former Sabres first-round pick Matthew Savoy, who played most of the year down in Bakersfield, played a few games with the Oilers. The Oilers, obviously, we know Corey Perry is gone, Connor Brown is gone, Jeff Skinner and Arvidsson are gone. There's a big hole there that now they brought in a few players in free agency, but there's an opportunity here for a talented young player to step in, and he may get a chance. And if he does, he might get a chance higher in the lineup.
Yeah, those are good observations there. Kelsey, anyone that comes to mind for you that kind of fits this description? Because I feel like we get these stories around the league every year.
Yeah, I think there's somebody on Pittsburgh's roster that comes to mind for me, and that's Philip Hollander. Because I think he's kind of somebody, he hasn't really had much of an opportunity at all at the NHL level. He's only played in 3 games. But, he's somebody that I think the Penguins, so he had kind of like a first run in the organization. He went and played in the SHL for the last couple seasons. And he was actually the SHL Player of the Year last season. He had 26 goals, 53 points in 51 games. This is a guy that the Penguins quite like when they drafted him back in 2018 in the second round. And I think he's going to make a legitimate push for this roster. There's going to be a lot of competition for roster spots in Pittsburgh. And Hollander kind of earned his second chance with the Penguins through his play in Sweden. So I'm kind of curious to see if he can really break through this year. Obviously, there's a couple other younger guys he's going to be competing with, guys who are a little bit younger than him, and Rucker McGroarty and Ville Koivunen. Hollander's 25 years old, so this is kind of a make or break season for him either way. But I think, this guy has good two-way potential. He obviously provides the Penguins with some much needed center depth. So I think he might get a pretty legitimate shot at the roster this year, and he can be an impact bottom six player if all goes right.
That's what makes training camp so fun, seeing these roster battles between these kinds of players. And just around the corner, we'll have more actually tangible roster battles to talk about here with these kinds of players. So good observations from both of you. Want to shift gears a little bit here because I think that, obviously during the summer when there's no active hockey being played, we talk a lot about the Olympics. We do have the Olympics coming up next year in Milano Cortina. And of course, just recently we were talking about the orientation camps or camps for Team USA, Team Canada, who was invited, who wasn't invited. Always good for conversation, especially with teams or with countries that have so much depth in talent. One of those is Canada. And I thought it was interesting in a recent interview with The Athletic, Nazem Kadri was rather outspoken about his frustration that he was not invited to Team Canada's orientation camp for the 2026 Olympics. So just to quote, he said, "I feel like I deserve a chance. I think over the last few seasons, I've certainly proven that with my statistics and the winning pedigree. I think it speaks for itself." Course, he did win a Stanley Cup with Colorado before ending up in Calgary, where he is now. It's interesting because 92 players were invited to Canada's orientation camp. So that's not a small number. And yet Kadri's still not on that list. So, Mike, do you think that Kadri is, do you think that his frustration is valid here? Do you think that he should have been invited? Or do you think that there's just simply too much depth in Canada's roster that it just wouldn't have made sense?
Well, this Nazem Kadri's senior quote must have been, "How do I love me? Let me count the ways." He's never been shy of self-promotion. I think he's a very good player, but, he was the 18th highest scoring forward, Canadian forward. And if you just take scoring, Matt Duchene scored more, Dylan Strome, Jordan Kyrou, and Drake Batherson. What do they all have in common? None of them were invited to Canada's camp. Now I looked over the 26 forwards they had, and you could make a case for maybe Bo Horvat or Ryan Nugent-Hopkins being disinvited and Kadri being invited, but I don't think either one of those players are going to make Team Canada. They invited two big guys like Quentin Byfield and Tom Wilson. Why? Because they know they're going to have to compete with the Kachuks. So, Nazem Kadri, I think probably the bug for him is the fact that somebody like John Tavares was invited to camp, who has a history with Team Canada, has gone to play at World Championships, has gone to play at the Olympics and won gold medals, and he didn't. He's 34 years old. This was his last chance. It's not happening.
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel about it. I understand the frustration, but also I think you need to read the room a little bit. Kelsey, what do you think about the frustrations on Kadri's part here?
Yeah, I mean, I think the frustrations are valid to an extent. He scored 35 goals last season. This isn't a nobody we're talking about. I mean, he's been a proven performer at the NHL level, and his past 4 seasons have been really, really solid, and some of the better seasons in his career. So, if you look at it from that lens, yeah. But I mean, as Mike said, this field is just so crowded, and there's just so many names here. Who do you take off of here? I mean, it's just kind of the whole, you know, there's not really anybody I think that he replaces, and you can confidently say that he should replace. So I'm kind of in the same boat as you guys. I think that there is some validity to his frustration, but at the end of the day, they put together a solid roster and a roster that should be really competitive. There's just too much depth with Team Canada, and there's also a little bit of a youth movement too. So I mean, Kadri's 33 years old. I think they're kind of leaning in towards bringing in some of these younger guys on the roster as well.
And Emma, I'll just say this. I mean, I know his issues in terms of getting suspended and making stupid plays maybe in the past, but on the international stage, when you're talking about a gold medal, you don't want a guy who cost his team in the past 2 series with stupidity. And, John Cooper won't stand for, and Team Canada won't stand for that. So that's a black mark that I don't think will ever be erased.
Very good point. Very good point. And I think that absolutely that's the kind of reputation that will precede you when it comes to things like this. The margins are razor thin when the field here is as crowded as it is for Team Canada. All right. Want to shift again. Want to talk about an interesting contract signing that we had over the offseason. After the Mitch Marner saga went down, felt like, maybe a bit of a snooze fest on the free agent front, but we still got some pretty surprising signings here. I think one of them was Tanner Jeannot to the Boston Bruins. So 5-year, $17 million contract. This is for a guy who scored just 7 goals and 6 assists in 67 games this past year for the LA Kings. So it is interesting to me because this is the same guy who Julian Brisebois gave up practically an entire draft class for in a trade with Nashville, and clearly that did not work out. He ends up in LA, still again has not quite reached the full scoring potential that I think that he was initially projected to have. I mean, it's a big guy. He will drop the gloves. He'll lay out some hits, but he really just doesn't have that scoring upside, at least not that we've seen really since his rookie campaign with Nashville. So, Mike, do you think that a player like Jeannot, do you think that he's finally going to put it all together and thrive in Boston? Do you think that is there a world in which we don't look at this contract as a massive overpay 5 years from now?
No, it will always be a massive overpay. I liked Jeannot as a risk signing for a number of teams on a 1-year deal. I was dumbfounded at the 5 years. I was dumbfounded at the 3.4 million, even with the cap going up. I mean, I think he's better than 7 goals. He did lead the Kings in hits, and he was injured late in the regular season and didn't play in the playoffs. So, I think there's something there. And if you look at, he's the prototypical Bruin. He's an energy guy. He's going to run people through the TD Garden boards. They're going to love him. He's going to drop the gloves and he's going to beat people up. But it's a question of term and AAV, and the fact that he's not the guy who scored 24 goals as a rookie with the Preds.
Kelsey, I saw you nod emphatically when Mike said Jeannot was the prototypical Bruin. So please, I feel like you have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I do think Boston's a good fit for him for those reasons. But I agree that he's reached kind of almost a limit, I think, in maximizing his offensive potential. I mean, he's 28 years old. He hasn't been able to do that the last couple seasons, but the prototypical thing kind of stands out to me because when I think about this contract and I think about the 3.4 million, I think about the 5 years. You think about a team like the Florida Panthers, and everybody's kind of trying to copycat now and trying to get these big, tough guys, these energy guys who can also score. I think it's almost like they hope that Jeannot can be a kind of guy like that, but it's almost like the skill set, the production just hasn't been there yet. So, I mean, I see the vision, I guess, but to justify paying him that much for that long, to pretty much a unproven player, and even though he fits kind of that archetype, he hasn't really lived up to it. So, I think in general, we're seeing a shift towards teams getting those more physical guys, getting those energy guys, trying to get a little bit bigger, trying to get tougher. But I'm just not aligning with the vision on the contract. I agree that this should have been a 1 or 2 year deal, and a take a chance kind of situation. But I do think Boston will be a good fit for him for that reason. I think he fits that mold, and I think that he'll be a good player for them. I'm just not sure he's going to be worth $3.4 million for 5 years.
Well, time will tell, I suppose, but it seems like we're all pretty aligned on that one. All right. Well, sticking with contract talks here, the Red Wings signed Travis Hamonic to a 1-year, $1 million contract this year. So looking at that kind of rounds out their decor. 5 of their 8 rostered defensemen in Detroit now are set to become UFAs next summer. So setting up kind of an interesting situation there in Detroit. So you've got Ben Sherratt, 34 years old, Justin Hall, 33 years old, Eric Gustafson, 33 years old, and now Hamonic, 35 years old. So with a lot of this looking like it's going to change in the next year, with all of these guys set to become UFAs, Mike, do you think that this aging decor might be the thing that's been holding Detroit back from being competitive? We're kind of running out of answers here when it comes to the so-called Yzer plan and why it hasn't come to fruition yet. I mean, do you think that there could be something to this year with this aging defense core?
I think it's a factor. Right? Goaltending has been a factor, and they maybe address that with John Gibson being added in the trade for Anaheim. They didn't get great goaltending out of guys like Ville Husso. The forwards, the scoring has been inconsistent. You add Patrick Kane, but there's still some things missing there. I mean, this defense, excluding Moritz Seider, excluding a young guy like Edvinsson, this defense resembles the junkyard from Sanford and Son. It's a bunch of old guys who are on the scrap heap. A couple of them are ex-Toronto Maple Leafs, who I think the Toronto fans were very happy to see Justin Hall and Gustafson leave. I think this is basically the replacement for Jeff Petrie. Jeff Petrie went to Florida, I believe, and he was a part-time veteran defenseman, and Hamonic was sort of the part-time veteran defenseman with Ottawa. So I just think this is sort of a plug-in for Petrie, and they're just buying time for some of the younger defensemen that they have in the system. They don't want to bring a Sandin Pellikka and play him in the NHL. They want to buy some time, and they're doing that with a veteran guy.
Kelsey, what do you think? How much blame for the Red Wings' failure to reach their potential, let's say, how much of that blame do you think falls on that aging defense core?
I mean, I think that it is a chunk of it. I wouldn't say that it's, the biggest thing, but I do think, they've kind of not really had a vision for that defense core. It doesn't seem like it's meshing very well. They also just don't really have like a bona fide offensive defenseman, which I think is kind of the issue over there. I mean, Seider is kind of been a little bit up and down since, that fabulous rookie campaign, but it's one of those things. I think they need to get younger, but I also think they need kind of a specific type of defenseman that they just have lacked. And there have been some rumors about Erik Karlsson in the Detroit Red Wings that wouldn't help the age issue, but they really need somebody to quarterback their power play, who can really drive offense from the blue line on a consistent basis at a really high output. So I think they're still lacking kind of in that star department on their blue line, and they really need that guy that's going to drive the bus for them. Is it in their system? I'm not sure about that. And maybe, with some of these expiring contracts, there could be maybe a Carlson deal in the works sometime next season. And they might be looking to kind of just offload some of these guys, flip some of these guys at the deadline. So we'll see what happens, but I do think it has been a contributing factor as to why they can't seem to get over the hump. They're just simply not getting enough offense from their blue line.
Yeah, and I do think that plenty of the blame goes on management in the front office there for maybe not adding offense to the blue line or even to the forward lines. I think that, talking about GMs who are maybe on the hot seat, I think Iserman maybe should be there in terms of guys who have the most to prove right now, because we've been hearing about this Iser plan for years and just haven't seen it come to fruition. So will be interesting to see what happens specifically on the blue line there. Um, kind of want to go back a little bit to what we were talking about, maybe with, a guy like Tanner Jeannot might kind of fall into this category, I think, but I think we see this every year around the league. Players who have kind of fallen into a rut with whatever team organization that they're with and could really benefit from a change of scenery. And we see this, like I said, all around the league every year. Guys who have just kind of disappeared with whatever organization they're in. They go to another organization, whether it's via trade or free agency, and they just completely pop off. So in your mind, Mike, is there anyone that immediately comes to mind in terms of players who you think would benefit the most from a change of scenery this year?
The poster child for this is Stuart Skinner of the Edmonton Oilers. He needs to get out of there so badly because every time he lets in a goal, the Edmonton fans will have like PTSD from the Stanley Cup final the last couple of years. I don't think he was at fault for the 7-game loss 2 years ago, but he was not very good in the playoffs this year at times. The honorable mention I had was Steven Stamkos, but I think he wants to stay in Nashville. He just wasn't very successful in Nashville. I think he wants to stay and prove that last year was a blip. I just don't know if it was. So I thought he might, but Skinner is the winner of this race, like Secretariat won the Belmont.
All right. What do you think, Kelsey? Is Skinner the winner here, or is there someone else you have in mind?
I mean, Skinner, I definitely had in mind, and I think the same can be said for Tristan Jarry in Pittsburgh. Tristan Jarry also badly needs a change of scenery. He is a 2-time All-Star, but obviously we've seen the last couple of years, especially in the second half of the season, his play tends to dip off. He was also waived by the Penguins this past season. He still has 3 years left on a deal that's paying him $5.125 million. So I think in the goaltending department, Tristan Jarry is in a similar place as Stuart Skinner, although he's on a rebuilding team. So keeping Jarry might be part of the goal of the Penguins. But if I had to pick one player, Pavel Mintyukov comes to mind for me for the Anaheim Ducks, because he's somebody, he had a lot of promise in his rookie season. And then, last season he kind of was in a sophomore slump. But the issue is the Anaheim Ducks have a lot of depth on their blue line, and he's simply being outplayed by some of these other younger guys now that are kind of starting to, get ahead of him on the depth chart. You think of the season Jackson Lacombe had last year, Olin Zellweger, both of those guys have kind of leapfrogged him on the depth chart. And last season we saw him benched a couple times. He saw a lot of bottom pairing minutes. So I'm looking for him to kind of get a change of scenery. I think there's still a lot of potential there. He's still only 21 years old, but I do think he's kind of a candidate for, a team in need of left side blue line help and maybe wants to take a chance on a player like him. I'm not sure the Ducks are super eager to get rid of him, but I think they would for the right package, simply because he's kind of starting to fall off a little bit in terms of their depth chart.
All right. Well, both or all of those, I think, are good names to keep an eye on. I had Tristan Jarry in mind immediately when I thought of this question. So definitely, you hate to see what's happened to him, I think, with Pittsburgh. And, you know what he can be. You've seen what he can be. And so if only he could just be it with a little bit more consistency, and maybe he could find that with a change of scenery. So remains to be seen whether that will happen, though. All right, want to wrap up today with kind of a fun one. Evgeny Kuznetsov still a free agent after terminating his KHL contract at the start of the offseason. So reportedly, he is trying to make an NHL comeback. His last season in the NHL was when he had 24 points in 63 games between the Capitals and the Hurricanes. Mike, do you think that Kuznetsov lands with an NHL team before the start of the season? And if so, who do you see signing him?
I think he will get a PTO. I think somebody will take a flyer on him. I don't know whether anybody will sign him to a one-year contract. If you look at his NHL record, after that massive season he had with the Caps when they won the Cup in 2018, it's slowly declined since. He had one good year, 78 points in 2022, but really his numbers have declined since. And then he had the year with when he got traded to, when he went to Carolina, and all the being banned by the IIHF and going to the KHL. And I mean, there's a lot of like storm clouds there. You can't, ignore the talent, but he is 33 years old. And with this league getting younger and bigger, I just don't know whether many teams will go in the direction. If I had to roll the dice, I would say, Washington gives him a PTO because he seems to be hanging around the Washington area. And I think maybe hoping and praying Ted Leonsis takes pity on him. So I'll guess the Capitals.
And maybe as long as Ovechkin's there for one more year, they give him one more chance to run it back. I don't know. To me, I know 33 is not young in NHL terms, but for some reason, Kuznetsov is one of those guys who I always feel like should be older. It feels like he's been around for longer, but maybe that's just me. But Kelsey, what do you think? Do you think that we see Kuznetsov back in the NHL this season?
I agree with Mike. I think this is going to be a PTO situation. I don't think anybody's going to be handing him a contract at this point. I also agree that Washington's the likely landing spot for that PTO, should he see it. I wouldn't rule out the Toronto Maple Leafs either. I still think that they could afford to maybe bolster some of their depth on the forward front. Maybe get kind of a guy that they can take a chance on. But again, I think that's going to be a PTO situation. I don't think anybody's going to be throwing any big sum of money towards Kuznetsov to be playing for them this season. Because if that was the case, I think it would have happened by now. I just don't think, as you already mentioned, he's been declining basically since 2018. This is nothing new. There's also just a lot of risk involved in signing him. So it's just, I think it's one of those things, PTO or bust. I don't think I see anything else, but I'd say Washington or Toronto would be my top two.
Well, and we've seen players that, may be on the decline have some success with PTOs over the last couple of years. Wasn't Max Pacioretty was a PTO with Toronto. So, we've seen it. We've seen it happen. It could happen again. So that's definitely a situation that we'll keep an eye on heading into training camps, which are still a little bit of a ways away, but not too far away. We'll get there, guys. We'll get there. Just hang in there. For now, thank you, though, for hanging in with us as we talk hockey throughout the offseason here on the Wraparound. Thank you again, as always, to Sticks.com for sponsoring us. We will be back with an all-new episode next week for the Wraparound. For Michael Augello and Kelsey Surmacz, I'm Emma Lingan, and we will see you next time.